Fixing the UK, a holistic strategy for economic growth and national well-being. Part 1. The problem. The UK at a crossroads. Chapter 1. The UK's stagnation. A nation in crisis. Introduction. A country at a standstill. The United Kingdom, once a global leader in economic growth, innovation, and social welfare, is now grappling with stagnation. Wages have flatlined. Productivity remains low, public services are crumbling, and the cost of living has skyrocketed. Across the country, people are feeling the squeeze, whether it's families unable to afford their energy bills, young professionals priced out of home ownership, or businesses struggling to survive in a turbulent economic climate. Economic stagnation is not just an abstract concept. It translates into long NHS wait times, overcrowded schools, expensive transport, and insecure jobs. The frustration is palpable. Public trust in the government's ability to improve living standards has plummeted, and strikes in multiple sectors, from nurses to train drivers, have become a regular occurrence. The reality is clear. Britain is stuck, and without a bold, holistic plan, it risks long-term decline. This chapter will explore the extent of the UK's stagnation, how it compares to other nations, and why past policy approaches have failed to reverse the trend. 1. The economic slowdown, declining prosperity. Britain's economic problems are multifaceted, but one of the most glaring issues is stagnant wages and sluggish GDP growth. Wages and inflation. In the past decade, wages have barely kept up with inflation. The median UK salary has stagnated, meaning that while costs for essentials like food, rent, and energy have soared, people's earnings have not increased at the same pace. GDP growth. The UK's economic growth has been sluggish compared to its European counterparts. Between 2010 and 2023, annual GDP growth averaged 1.5%, far below pre-200 levels. Productivity crisis. The UK's productivity, often considered the key to long-term prosperity, has stagnated. The UK's productivity growth has been one of the worst in the G7, leading to lower wages and weaker economic output. Key statistic. Between 2000 and 2022, the UK's productivity growth was just 0.3% per year, compared to 0.9% in the US and 1.2% in Germany. Case study: why Germany and the US are pulling ahead. Both Germany and the US have focused on high-skilled job creation, technology investment, and infrastructure development. Germany has prioritized vocational training, ensuring that workers are highly skilled and well-paid. Meanwhile, the US has seen higher wage growth in sectors like tech and renewable energy. In contrast, the UK's reliance on low-paid, low-security jobs, especially in retail and hospitality, has trapped many workers in economic precarity. 2. The cost of living crisis. An affordability emergency. For millions of British households, the biggest concern is the rising cost of living. Essentials like housing, transport, energy, and food have become significantly more expensive, with little relief in sight. Housing costs. Rent and mortgage costs have far outpaced wage growth. London and other major cities now have some of the highest rental costs in Europe, forcing young professionals and families into financial strain. Energy bills. The UK has some of the highest energy costs in Western Europe, in part due to the privatization of utilities and dependence on global energy markets. Food prices. Inflation in food prices has hit double digits, putting pressure on household budgets. Transport costs. Rail and bus fares in the UK are among the most expensive in the world. Commuters often spend a fifth of their salary just getting to work. Key statistic. The average home now costs 9 times the median salary, compared to just 3 times in 1995. UK energy prices increased by 65% between 2021 and 2023, while wages rose by only 5%. UK rail fares are 3 times higher than in France and 5 times higher than in Germany. Case study: how France keeps rail travel affordable. France's state-backed rail system offers heavily subsidized tickets for commuters and long-distance travel. In contrast, the UK's fragmented and privatized network prioritizes shareholder profits over affordability. A simple London-Manchester train ticket can cost over £100, while a comparable journey in France costs under $30. 3. The public services decline. A broken social contract. Public services, once a cornerstone of Britain's economic model, are in deep crisis. Years of austerity, underfunding, and mismanagement have left key services overstretched and underperforming. The NHS crisis, long waiting times, overwhelmed hospitals, and chronic underfunding have turned the NHS from a national treasure into a struggling institution. Education. Inequality. Schools face teacher shortages, underinvestment in resources, and growing disparities in education quality. Policing and crime. Budget cuts have led to a decline in policing effectiveness, leading to rising concerns about crime in urban areas. Key statistic: NHS waiting lists hit a record 7 million patients in 2023, up from 2.5 million in 2010. UK school funding per pupil has declined in real terms by 9% since 2010. Police numbers have dropped by 20% since 2010, despite rising concerns about crime. Case study: how Scotland took a different approach. While England pursued deep NHS budget cuts, Scotland opted for consistent investment in healthcare and education. As a result, Scotland has seen better health outcomes and higher student performance compared to England. 4. Why past policies have failed. Successive governments have promised reform, yet little meaningful change has occurred. The main reason? A lack of a holistic approach. Mistake 1. Piecemeal solutions. Governments have focused on short-term fixes rather than structural reform. For example, Help to Buy schemes have fueled housing inflation rather than making homes affordable. Energy bill relief payments provide temporary relief, but do not fix the underlying market failures. Minimum wage increases have been offset by rising costs in rent, transport, and energy. Mistake 2. Over-reliance on private markets. The UK has privatized many essential services, rail, energy, water, under the belief that competition would lower prices. In reality, it has led to price gouging and declining service quality. Mistake 3. Lack of long-term investment. Countries like Germany, France, and the Netherlands have made consistent long-term investments in infrastructure, education, and public transport. The UK, by contrast, has underinvested, leading to crumbling roads, outdated public transport, and an unskilled workforce. Conclusion: the need for a bold, holistic strategy. The UK is at a turning point. A failing economy, unaffordable living costs, and a collapsing public sector have left millions of people frustrated and disillusioned. The country needs a new vision, one that prioritizes affordability, accessibility, and economic renewal. Instead of patchwork fixes, the UK must adopt a comprehensive national strategy that includes affordable housing and rent control, a nationalized, low-cost energy model, public transport investment to reduce costs, higher wages and a fair tax system, revitalized NHS and education funding. Chapter 2. The Cost of Living Crisis. Breaking Households. Introduction. A nation under financial strain. Across the United Kingdom, millions of households are struggling to keep up with soaring costs for essentials: housing, food, energy, and transport. The cost of living crisis is not just an economic issue. It is a daily reality that is pushing families into financial hardship, limiting economic mobility, and eroding the quality of life. For the average Briton, paychecks no longer stretch as far as they once did. Inflation has surged, but wages have barely budged, leading to a decline in real disposable income. Basic necessities like groceries, rent, and commuting have become financial burdens, forcing households to cut back on spending, delay major life decisions, or even rely on food banks. This chapter explores how inflation and wage stagnation have squeezed UK households, the factors behind the crisis, and the real-life consequences for families and businesses. 1. Inflation versus wages, a losing battle for households. Inflation has eroded the purchasing power of British households, making everyday goods and services significantly more expensive. Yet wages have failed to keep pace, leading to a stark reduction in living standards. The inflation surge. The UK's inflation rate reached a 40-year high in 2022, with prices rising at an alarming rate across all sectors. Although inflation has since cooled, the damage has already been done. Households are now paying permanently higher prices for goods and services. Key statistics. Between 2020 and 2023, UK inflation peaked at 11.1%, its highest level since the 1990s. Food prices surged by over 20% in just 2 years. Energy costs rose by 65% between 2021 and 2023, driven by global supply shocks and an over-reliance on foreign gas. Meanwhile, wage growth has not kept pace with inflation. Between 2010 and 2023, real wages adjusted for inflation, declined for most workers. In 2022 alone, real wages fell by 3%, the sharpest drop in decades. Public sector workers, teachers, nurses, and civil servants saw wages decline by 5 to 10% in real terms over the last decade. The real impact: less money, more stress. For a typical UK household, this means less disposable income, greater reliance on credit, and rising debt levels. Families that were once financially stable now find themselves making difficult choices, cutting back on heating in winter due to unaffordable energy bills, skipping meals or relying on food banks, postponing major purchases like home improvements or car replacements. Case study: the household budget squeeze. Sarah, a single mother in Manchester, earns £2,000 a year. In 2021, her monthly grocery bill was £300, now it's £450. Her rent has increased by 15%, and her energy bill has nearly doubled. Despite working full-time, she now has to choose between paying bills on time or buying fresh food for her children. 2. Housing costs. A nation priced out. If inflation is the spark of the cost of living crisis, housing costs are the fuel. Housing is the single largest expense for most UK households, and it has become increasingly unaffordable. Renters, locked in a struggle. Rents have skyrocketed. Average private rents increased by 30% between 2015 and 2023. In London, renters now spend nearly 50% of their income on housing, far above the recommended 30% affordability threshold. Competition for rental properties is fierce, leading to bidding wars where tenants must offer above asking price just to secure a home. Homeownership, a dream out of reach. For those hoping to buy a home, the situation is equally dire. The average UK home now costs 9 times the median salary, compared to 3 times in the 1990s. Mortgage rates have doubled, making home loans more expensive. First-time buyers need a deposit of at least £50,000 to secure an affordable mortgage, making homeownership inaccessible for many. Case study: the rental trap. David and Emma, a couple in their early 30s, earn a combined £65,000 a year. They have been renting a small one-bedroom flat in London for £2,000 a month. Despite saving diligently, they cannot afford a mortgage deposit. Their rent consumes nearly half their income, leaving little room for savings. They feel stuck in an endless cycle, renting forever without the ability to buy. Why housing costs are so high? 1. A severe lack of affordable homes. Successive governments have failed to build enough social and affordable housing. 2. Buy-to-let landlords and property investors have driven up prices. 3. No rent control laws, unlike in cities such as Berlin, where rental price caps keep housing affordable. 3. Energy bills. The cost of staying warm. Energy costs have become a major burden for UK households, with many struggling to heat their homes in winter. The energy price crisis. UK households pay some of the highest energy bills in Europe. Between 2021 and 2023, the average annual energy bill rose from $1,277 to over $2,500. Energy price caps provided temporary relief, but underlying structural problems remain. Case study: the heat or eat dilemma. In Birmingham, 72-year-old Margaret lives on a fixed pension of £14,000 a year. Her gas and electricity bill doubled in 2022, forcing her to cut down on heating during the winter months. She now wears multiple layers indoors and limits hot meals to once a day to save on costs. How other countries keep energy affordable. France. Energy prices are capped due to state control of major energy companies. Norway. Heavily subsidized renewable energy keeps electricity cheap. Germany. Investment in energy efficiency programs reduces demand. 4. Food prices. The inflation no one can avoid. The cost of food has risen sharply, leaving many struggling to afford basic groceries. The rise in food costs. Food prices rose by 20% between 2021 and 2023. Basic staples like milk, bread, and pasta have doubled in price. Supermarkets have been accused of price gouging, with food inflation outpacing wholesale costs. Case study: the food bank surge. Over 2.5 million people in the UK relied on food banks in 2023, a record high. The Trussell Trust reported a 37% increase in emergency food parcel distribution. Conclusion: a crisis demanding urgent action. The UK's cost of living crisis is not inevitable. It is the result of policy choices that have favored speculation over affordability, privatization over public investment, and short-term fixes over long-term solutions. To break the cycle, the UK needs bold, systemic changes, including affordable housing policies, rent caps, social housing expansion, and better tenant protections, fair wages, raising the minimum wage to reflect actual living costs, energy reform, state control or tighter regulation of energy markets, tax reform, reducing VAT on essential goods and introducing windfall taxes on profiteering industries. Without decisive action, the UK risks further widening inequality, economic stagnation, and a decline in public well-being. Chapter 3. The Public Services Breakdown. A Nation in Crisis. Introduction. The slow erosion of public services. The United Kingdom's public services, once the backbone of a strong social contract, are now in a state of severe decline. The NHS, education system, transport infrastructure, and policing are all buckling under years of underfunding, mismanagement, and rising demand. For millions of people, the decline in public services is not an abstract policy failure. It is a daily struggle to access basic health care, secure a good education for their children, and navigate a crumbling transport network. The core problems plaguing UK public services include chronic underfunding. Real terms cuts have stretched resources to breaking point. Workforce shortages, low wages, and burnout have driven key workers away. Growing demand, an aging population, and economic hardship have put more pressure on services. Privatization and outsourcing failures. Profit-driven models have led to inefficiencies and poor service quality. This chapter will examine the most pressing issues facing public services, exploring the NHS crisis, struggling schools, failing transport, and collapsing infrastructure. 1. The NHS, a healthcare system in critical condition. The National Health Service, NHS, is one of the UK's greatest institutions, but it is now in permanent crisis mode. Staff shortages, record waiting lists, and funding shortfalls have weakened the system, leaving millions of people waiting months, even years, for medical care. Key issues facing the NHS. Record waiting lists. The backlog for routine treatments has hit 7 million patients, the highest in NHS history. A&E overcrowding. Emergency departments are overwhelmed, with patients waiting an average of 12+ hours for urgent care. Staffing crisis. There are over 130,000 NHS vacancies, including shortages of nurses, doctors, and paramedics. GP access issues. Many people struggle to book GP appointments, with some forced to wait weeks to see a doctor. Underfunding. NHS spending has failed to keep up with demand, leading to cutbacks in services and hospital closures. Key statistics. NHS waiting lists have tripled since 2010. 1 in people in the UK are waiting for medical treatment. 1 in 5 GP appointments are now handled by pharmacists or paramedics due to doctor shortages. Case study: A&E delays costing lives. In early 2023, 79-year-old Peter suffered a heart attack and was rushed to A&E. Due to a shortage of hospital beds, he waited over 16 hours on a trolley in a corridor before receiving treatment. Stories like Peter's are becoming the norm, with long delays increasing the risk of serious complications and death. Why is the NHS in crisis? 1. Decades of underfunding. NHS budgets have not kept pace with growing demand. 2. Staff burnout and low pay. Nurses and junior doctors have gone on strike over uncompetitive wages. 3. Privatization and inefficiencies. Outsourcing essential services has often led to higher costs and worse patient care. 4. An aging population. More people require medical care than ever before, but NHS capacity has not expanded. International comparison: how does the UK compare? France spends 25% more per person on healthcare, resulting in shorter waiting times and better patient outcomes. Germany has twice as many hospital beds per capita, preventing the kind of overcrowding seen in UK hospitals. Denmark offers universal digital health records, making GP and specialist referrals much faster. 2. Education. Schools at a breaking point. The UK's education system is struggling, with underfunded schools, overwhelmed teachers, and widening inequalities. Years of real terms cuts have left schools unable to afford basic resources, while teacher shortages and high workloads are driving experienced educators out of the profession. Key issues facing education. School funding crisis. Many schools are facing budget deficits, leading to larger class sizes and fewer resources. Teacher shortages. More than a third of teachers quit within 5 years, citing low pay and high stress. Declining student performance. The UK is falling behind other developed nations in maths, reading, and science scores. University affordability. Tuition fees of £9,250 per year leave many students in tens of thousands of pounds in debt. Key statistics. 9 out of 10 schools in England expect budget cuts in 2024. The UK has the highest student debt levels in Europe. Teacher vacancies increased by 93% between 2017 and 2023. Case study: a teacher's struggle. Emma, a secondary school teacher, works 60-plus hours a week but earns just £36,000 a year after 10 years in the profession. She frequently buys classroom supplies out of her own pocket due to budget shortfalls. Facing burnout, she plans to quit teaching next year, joining thousands of others leaving the profession. What's causing the education crisis? 1. Chronic underfunding. Per pupil spending has fallen in real terms over the past decade. 2. Uncompetitive pay. UK teachers earn less than their European counterparts, leading to high attrition. 3. Overloaded curricula. Schools are under pressure to deliver more content without additional support. 4. Lack of apprenticeships. University is expensive, yet alternative career pathways remain underdeveloped. International comparison. How do other countries support schools? Finland has no standardized testing, yet achieves some of the best student results in the world. Germany offers free higher education, making university far more accessible than in the UK. Sweden pays teachers significantly more, resulting in better retention rates. 3. Transport and infrastructure. A system in decay. Britain's public transport and infrastructure are outdated, expensive, and unreliable. Years of neglect and underinvestment have led to delays, rising fares, and frequent breakdowns. Key issues facing transport and infrastructure. Expensive rail travel. The UK has the highest train fares in Europe, yet service quality is among the worst. Aging roads and bridges. Many roads and bridges are in disrepair, causing congestion and safety concerns. Bus cuts in rural areas. Many rural towns have no reliable bus service, leaving people isolated. Public transport strikes. Train and bus workers are regularly striking over pay and working conditions. Key statistics. UK commuters pay up to 5 times more for train travel than their European counterparts. 1 in 5 train services are cancelled or delayed. Over 5,000 bus routes have been cut since 2010. Case study: the daily commute. Struggle. James commutes from Brighton to London daily. His train ticket costs £5,500 a year, more than his monthly rent. Yet trains are often delayed or cancelled, leaving him exhausted and frustrated. International comparison. How do other countries get it right? Germany's $49 travel pass allows unlimited train and bus travel for a fraction of UK prices. France's state-run rail network keeps fares affordable and service reliable. Japan's bullet trains run on time 99% of the time, compared to the UK's chronic delays. Conclusion: public services need urgent reform. The UK's NHS, education system, and transport network are all in crisis, yet government responses have been inadequate. Without urgent investment, these problems will only get worse. What needs to change? Proper NHS funding, boost wages, increase hospital capacity, and invest in AI-driven healthcare. Education reform, increase teacher pay, reduce tuition fees, and improve vocational training. Affordable transport, introduce a UK-wide £1 bus fare and $49 monthly rail pass. Without action, millions of people will continue to suffer from inadequate services,